G'day, everybody, and welcome to this post-processing session here from our New Zealand 2023 July winter workshop. Thanks, everybody, for watching. And there's a couple of things that I want to do today. Is mainly run through many of the locations we went to on the workshop. You'll see that we had fantastic weather, which was, I guess, unusual for New Zealand in a sense that it was quite mild. We only had one or two occasions where it tried to rain on us, and that was for only a very brief period of time. But all the locations we went to were spectacular. And the idea about this session is not only to show you perhaps how I process the images, but it's also to show you my techniques in terms of photographing each of the different locations. So something that I want to show you today is examples perhaps of both images from a same location that worked very well, or it might be that I have chosen something that I didn't feel worked well, and this was the better image. So really wanting to educate you around light composition, but also in terms of post-production. So let's get stuck into it. And first and foremost, I've got these two photographs here from Meraki Boulders that I wanted to show you. This was the first location, as you remember, that we hit up for sunrise. Now, very fortunate to have a sunrise without any rain or strong winds, etc. These are the two shots that I chose from this, or one of the sets of images that I chose from this location that I wanted to show you. Very similar in terms of where they're photographed. For example, this set of boulders here is this one over here in the left-hand corner. I chose the one on the left rather than this one on the right as being a better image. And the reason being is that I was really attracted to these long shadows that were extending out over the beach where the tide had just recently gone and disappeared out to the ocean there. And I really enjoyed the light skimming across the ripples in the sand there. You'll see less of that here. The shadows are falling off to the sides. There's this bare patch of sand in the middle that's really not of great interest. And so I don't find this shot on the right nearly as engaging as this one here on the left, okay? So just showing you an example of how I'll try things when I'm photographing, but not necessarily know what's going to work out best. So rather than trying to decide there at the time, I'll take the shots anyway and give myself that option of choosing later, okay? Here's another set of images that I want to show you from Meraki, whereby I'm always telling the participants to shoot both vertically and horizontally if it suits. And this is a case of where this is the same location, but as you can see, I've shot it both vertically and horizontally. I actually prefer the vertical image, and I'll let you know in a second. The horizontal image here, I was really attracted to the light coming off the water here, the edge of the pond, which was recently wet from the tides subsiding. And I really liked that strong ray of light coming through the middle there. And again, those strong shadows that were being formed by the boulders, etc. I feel this is a lot going on, which is really nice. But I tell you why I like the vertical more. I've gone in closer. Now, just to let you know, through most of the pictures that I show you here today, I was using a new camera and lens, which is a Fuji GFX 100 megapixel beautiful camera, but with a wide angle lens, the equivalent of, say, like a 16 to sort of 28 mil lens, okay? And so I'm predominantly using wide angle lenses. And with that, they're quite tricky to use because they include so much. So one of the things that I was telling you guys, the participants here on the workshop, was that with these boulders, if you're going to shoot with a wide angle lens, you really do have to get in close. And for example, here, I'm probably standing only about half a meter away from the edge of that pool. And in fact, let's just have a look at this photo here on the left. And if I just press I on the keyboard, it's going to bring up my details here. And so this is a 60th of a second at f/16, ISO 200. But I just wanted to see what focal length I was using there. I have zoomed in a little. And I think that's what I was telling the guys here on the workshop. You'll notice here, this is 20 mil. I've gone the other way. This is how I tend to shoot. With a horizontal, I tend to shoot really wide because I want to include everything across the frame. Okay, does that make sense? I want to include everything within the width of the frame there. But when I'm shooting vertically, I'm tending to want to sort of compress the image and bring those boulders in the background closer to everything else in the foreground. And with that, I'm zooming in a little just to compress it a little more, as opposed to these ones where you can see these boulders seem like are really far away. And in fact, the pool here where the boulders are sitting seems further away as well. And really, I'm not that far away at all. It's just the wide angle lens, it appears like this is like, 2 meters, when in fact it's probably less than a meter. And here I'm standing the same distance, but again, the boulders in the foreground seem, the boulders in the foreground here seem a lot closer because I've zoomed in. So just to summarize, horizontal, shooting out wide. When I go vertical for the same image, I tend to zoom in a little. And I like the placement of the sun here. I love that shadow here and the light coming off the sand here. The light hitting this top of this rock, but also this one here on the right-hand side I enjoy, and then the light coming through here. But what I really was focusing on here, being vertical image, was this ray of light coming out of the bottom right-hand corner, which I love, but also that vertical line that runs through these two boulders here, where the water is obviously flowing out of this pool and going down to the ocean. That's a really nice leading line, isn't it? That takes my eye from the bottom here, which is quite dark, to the lighter area, and then around to the sun, and then back around again. Okay, just to look at how I developed this photo. Where's it gone? I did do an auto adjustment. What I'm in fact going to do is I'm just going to replicate this image. So I did the keyboard shortcut version, but create virtual copy, which on a Mac is Command apostrophe. I'll just reset this image, not this one. Where is it gone? This one here. Reset this one. Computer's jumping around today. Reset. There we go. Okay, so there's now the original image. When you're exposing for a photograph like this, you really have to expose for the highlights, unless you're going to do a blended image, an HDR type of image. I find that that's not necessary most of the time these days, because with the cameras, the more modern cameras, if you're using one of those, in the last 2 or 3 years, they have such great, beautiful dynamic range where they're capturing details in the highlights as well as the shadows very well. And the software is able to drag out that detail in the shadows really nicely, that it's not really essential that we have to bracket the image. So long as you expose to the right. Now, there's 2 things that you'll notice about this histogram, is that we've got a peak on the right and we've got a peak on the left. What does that mean? The peak on the right is for the whites. Okay. And in fact, if we click that little triangle there, it's showing us what has blown out, which is the sun, which you'd expect. If you expose just for the sun and nothing else, everything else in this image would be black. Okay. So we have to blow out the highlights when we're photographing into the sun, which is what's happened here. But we don't want to underexpose the image so much that our blacks become too black. And if we click on that triangle there in the top left-hand corner, the underexposed pixels will come out a blue. That will be shaded blue. Now, we don't have that. We just have that. And the reason being, the reason we have very little, if any, pixels that are 100% black is because I've pushed that histogram to the right without grossly overexposing the highlights. Okay, so there are overexposed highlights. As I said, you'd expect that with photographing into the sun. But what we're not going to see on the back of the camera when we're taking the photo and we're looking at the crappy little JPEG on the back of the camera, we're not going to see a histogram this big, and B, that there's a gap in between 100% black and where the histogram actually starts, hence why there's no blue pixels here. We're not going to see the detail in here, just like we can't now. But if we click auto in the image here, have a look at how much detail it's been able to drag out of those shadows. We can see all of that. And in fact, I don't want all of that, but I'm just going to show you how I correct that in a second. Okay, but there is all that information there if we want it. Okay, what we're going to do here is not have as much of that. Okay, we just want to have a bit of mystery around this image. You can see here, when I show everything here, it kind of looks flat, but it also too, am I really interested in all of that detail in these boulders? Not really. So I peeked that back a little, because what attracted me to this photograph in the first place was not the shadows, but the highlights. Sorry, not the detail in the shadows. I love the shadows, hence why I'm shooting into the sun. But I'm really interested in, as I said, this light, these highlights that are coming off all these different objects in the image. Okay, so I really don't want the shadows to be up as far as what Lightroom wants to do. Okay, so I've pegged that back a bit. The other thing that's really lacking in this photograph is color. So we're really going to try and enhance that color, but that is just grotesque. Okay, that's way too heavy in the saturation there. And it's also not the right kind of color that I want. That it's a very yellow, and I know that sounds ridiculous, but I want it to be sort of more like a warmer yellow. And with that, I've added a tint of about 45, the magenta. And you can see what it's done there. It's created a nice sort of warmer tone to the image, which I prefer. Okay. The other thing I want to do to this image, as I said earlier, is I really want to highlight this light that comes through here. And so there's a couple of ways we can do it. I think one of the ways that I'd like to start with is perhaps just drawing a linear gradient up from the bottom here, just to highlight that area here, and just go up with the white slider here. Can you see that? That's why the white slider and why not the exposure slider. The exposure slider deals with midtones. And as you can see, it's dragging out detail in the shadows as well as the highlights. I don't want to do that. Whites will only deal with the highlights there. Even the highlights will just deal with the highlights. And you can see the two of those combined means that I can then just have that part of the image just, you see, just lighten up. And in fact, I'm going to saturate that a little more as well, because I really want that color to be nice in the corner there. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add another brush. So Lightroom in the last sort of 12, 18 months has changed in terms of how you do multiple masks or brushes here. So now up here, we click brush, and with a flow of 100% density, 100%, we're going to maybe peg back the feather a little there, and we're going to peg back the size. And what I want to do in terms of whites is I really want to highlight this area here coming through here. Now, don't worry about it at this stage. And these boulders, I really love the lightness on these boulders just here. So we're going to do this. It's a bit gaudy at the moment. It's a bit too much. So we can obviously, we've drawn the mask. You can see that here. Okay, we've drawn the mask. That's the red shading. Okay, but then we can adjust accordingly here. So we'll just do a little bit of like peg that back a bit, or we'll increase the saturation slightly perhaps. But again, what I want to do is I want to be able to see what difference that has made and whether or not it's enhanced it or not. I could have been a little more careful perhaps with the brushing here, but I might actually just brush that in a little more here like this and just peg back that white a little. Again, everything you do in Lightroom, you want to make it look like you've not done it already, like as in it's not too obvious. What I'm doing is I'm creating a third brush. And the reason I'm doing that with not much feather, and I'm really going to decrease the size, is I really want to go back to this edge of this rock. And I really want to enhance that brightness there as well. So I'm just rubbing in a brush here. It's overlapped here on the edge, which is bad. Okay, so I'm actually going to do that again. You see the brush? Even though I've got auto mask ticked, auto mask will try and keep it within the boundary, but it's not done it very well. So in fact, I'm just going to reverse that. I just press Command Z. You could then go edit, undo. And I'm going to draw that again just because it was a bit sloppy. So we're just going to go into brush here. Okay, I'm going to go with very little feather. And then I don't want to be able to see the mask. So I'll tick that off. You see there? I'm just going to tick that off. Just want to be able to draw this mask in, which we can't see. You see how I had to make an adjustment here first in order to be able to see where the brush is going. So I'm choosing what I'm wanting to do there, and that's a much neater look. And I'm going to actually add a bit of color to that. Look, you could go via saturation, which has done a pretty good job, but you could also enhance it via color. You see here, I could add a little bit of yellow to that brush. It looks a bit ugly there, but I'm actually going to see what it looks like. I've just zoomed in there. I can be very specific here in terms of how I paint this in. You could do this pixel by pixel almost, and this is the better way. I don't often do this. I don't make very localized adjustments to the photographs necessarily because it looks too obvious a lot of the time. See, when I peg that back, at close up, it looked horrible, but then when I bring it back, it looks quite nice. And in fact, I could adjust the brightness of that using this white slider. I could adjust the temperature of it, as in the color of it here in temperature, as well as saturation. So all of that is adjustable based on the fact that I've created that mask right there in order to have it look the way I want. But I just wanted to highlight that there and just show you that technique. If I now press the backslash key, which is underneath the delete key, top right-hand corner of my keyboard, when I'm in the develop module, it then goes from being before, in fact, not before, because we had already had created something. That's what it started out as. And now this is what it's ended up as. Okay, what we'll do is we'll put those side by side. in order to show you what looks good. Create another one there, develop, reset. Okay, computer's running a bit slow today. X plus Y, there we go. No, X plus Y. Okay, so there's the before on the right, there's the after on the left. You'll see the difference there, hopefully enough to be able to make a judgment as to which you prefer there, but you can just see simple adjustments there in order to have that image nicely polished. Let's move on. Hope you learned something from that one there. Okay, so I wanted to show you these two, the last of the Meraki boulder shots, simply because the one on the left I thought was going to be a good photo, and then I turned around and literally right behind me was the one on the right. Okay, I'm going to tell you that I prefer the one on the right rather than the one on the left, and there's things wrong with each, but let me tell you why I prefer, the one on the right. The one on the left here, really close in. Let me just show you what the focal length was. The focal length, this is not at 25.9 mil in full frame. We need to times it by about 0.8 because it's a medium format sensor. So it ends up being about 22 mil, something like that. Quite wide, standing over the top of this, pointing the camera right down, standing in very close to this in order to get that shot. Okay, I'm just going to try and make this fit. There we go. I don't like this photo simply because of that front boulder there. That's what I first look at, but the fractured nature of it, I just don't find very aesthetically pleasing. This one feels much better because of the smooth roundness of it. And I love the color hitting that rock there in the foreground. What I don't like about this one is that this is quite elongated, again, because I'm standing over the top of it with a very wide angle lens, the equivalent of about a 16 mil lens. Okay. So that's distorted because I'm standing so close to that boulder. I'm literally almost falling over it. And then also this branch here or log here, I'm finding a bit distracting. So I could easily clone that out if I wanted to. And to fix this boulder, it would probably be best for me to go into Photoshop in order to correct the distortion there. But I just want to go in here to Lightroom and see if this helps at all. This transform, no, not really done. That's that vertical. You see, that's going to enhance it even more. So I could do something like that. Create crop. The horizon is not straight. So we'll just adjust that. That's almost cropped out this log on the right, on the left, sorry. So that's pretty good as well. But it certainly helped with that distortion. You see the difference now? It certainly helped with this rock not looking as distorted as it was. Okay. But I do like the light hitting that one, for example. So again, to work this picture even more, I've done a basic adjustment, added a little bit of magenta, and then I would definitely want to come in here with a brush in order to then just brush in a little bit more light and a little bit more saturation with a little bit of a feather. Using the square brackets on my keyboard, I can just make that brush bigger. That's looking way too yellow. Okay, so we can peg that back a little, take yellow out. Maybe we add a little bit of magenta as well, but it's adding it way too much up into there. So let's not do that. In fact, we could take away with the brush. So click the minus button here with the brush, and we could rub some of that adjustment out over here, for example, just to have that. Now you can see that that mask is just to this area here. And in fact, we don't want it spilling over. So we'll come back here and we'll just, again, make this a bit smaller, rub that out. Okay. Again, I don't like using a lot of localized adjustment brushes for that purpose. Let's click that mask off and let's just maybe add a little bit of saturation's doing it. A little bit of warmth, maybe. Let's have a look. Sometimes you need to stand back in order to be able to see whether or not the adjustment that you made is decent or not. So let's just, it's not looking great. Let's pick back those shadows. This adjustment is just way too magenta. We'll keep it as it was. We'll just up the saturation a little. That'll be fine. Maybe I'm fiddling for fiddling's sake. Okay, the next place here is Perenaki Falls in the Caitlin's area. It was in flood at the time. And so it really did have quite a bit of brown water coming out of it. Let's just see what it looked like initially. Not too bad at all. That longer exposure has actually had it be more pleasing than what it looked like in real life. It did look quite dirty and brown. Okay, let's just have a look. This is handheld, I believe, with that camera, or might have been on a tripod. I can't remember, but it's about half a second, which has created that really nice effect with the water. But the reason I wanted to throw this photograph in was just to sort of illustrate the fact that that's your sort of stock standard photo, and that's fine. But when I'm teaching photography and when I'm actually there on my own at any location, I don't want to get just the stock standard photo, or I don't want to get one photo alone. So when I've got the photo, the first photo that I'm happy with, what I tend to do is then ask myself, right, what can I get next? What else? What else? What else? What else? What else? Okay, like a kid at Christmas. What else? And so, for example, I just went off to the side a little, found I actually cheated. There was this leaf here, but this one was sort of back over here. And I went, well, two is probably better than one. It's going to make it more interesting. So I just placed that leaf there. Okay. And then got in quite close with my wide angle lens, again, using quite a slow shutter speed, but not so slow that I'm causing the movement in that waterfall or the movement in the water to blur and blend into one just great big mass. So hand holding just with this camera at, I believe, about that half a second, quarter of a second, with the movement of that water, obviously had it moving, but I'm not as a fast enough shutter speed that it stops the water, and I'm not so slow that that just becomes a wall of water. Okay, I really enjoyed this foreground and the light coming off it. And in fact, I'd enhance that even more if I was just to draw a linear gradient up from the bottom here on a bit of an angle, and then just go for the white slider. And you see how that white slider is just helping lift the whole photo in the bottom corner there. You see that? It's just lightening that foreground really nicely to balance it with the background, which is quite bright, obviously. Okay, and not feeling the need to include all of the waterfall either. At the end of the day, I'm finding the patterning in the foreground really interesting, and then I'm leading my eye up into the waterfall, and I don't need to see all of the waterfall like in this previous shot. Okay, I'm over here on the left-hand side. Okay, and then I'm always saying, rather than just sticking to horizontal, go vertical as well. So you can see we've got two options there. One's not necessarily better than the other, but I like to give myself that option, okay, when I come to choose my photos. You'll see there's a beautiful diagonal line coming out of the bottom right-hand corner of the frame that leads your eye up to these leaves, and then over here to the waterfall itself. So I like both of those compositions, not necessarily one over the other, but I do like both. And then I found this other spot. So my leaves were up over here. And then I found this other spot here that I thought might be quite interesting because there was a bit of greenery in the photograph. Okay, and I really like this froth that's being caused in the bottom here. So yes, it's froth, Mary, froth. It's froth. She's giving me a hard time for saying froth wrong. Anyway, the other thing I do is, because you can't predict how these are going to come out in a photograph when it's quite a slow shutter speed, sometimes they look good and other times they don't. I take quite a few. And in fact, no, I can't do that. I was going to go back to my raw files and show you that, but I'm in a collection here, so I won't do that. But I took about half a dozen here just to choose the best one in terms of that froth on the side. Here is the next waterfall, McLean Falls, the upper McLean Falls. I really love this section of the waterfall. I've shot this with a long lens from this angle before, just to isolate that part, because I feel it gets a bit messy down here. And because I've been to these locations 2 or 3 times now, my goal with the new camera that I was using was to create something different. There's no point me going back to the same location, any location, wherever it be, whether it's a workshop or not. There's no point going back and just shooting the same stuff. So I have been to this location before in the same conditions. So I'm like, right, where could I stand that could be different to everywhere else I've gone? Okay, so there was the vertical shot with the horizontal shot here. I find this a cleaner shot, and it also helps accentuate the height of the waterfall. This one here tends to sort of stretch it out widthwise. I find this log uninteresting and distracting and far too close to the bottom of the frame. And this is a bit of dead space here as well. There's not really a lot happening here on the right-hand side. So I feel that cleans it up a bit and makes it more about the waterfall rather than the distracting elements here on each side. And then it was a matter of getting closer still. So in fact, what we ended up being is about here, okay, in between this log that have fallen down. So now I'm here. And this really hasn't been worked to its full ability. In fact, I'm not sure it's been worked much at all. It was just an auto reset. And it's a bit dull. See how the histogram is down here? It's the whites aren't white. So we need to grab the white slider and drag it up to the right. Of course, we don't want to go too far and blow out the highlights. We can even see if we've blown out the highlights just by ticking that triangle there. It's a little bit there that we're just blowing out those highlights there. The shadows are quite dull, so let's lift those up. Again, there's a big black spot there, which is not pleasing. Okay, and then the color seems a bit off. It's a bit lacking. There's not, the greens aren't really punchy green, and it'd be nice to enhance this detail here in the foreground. Look, this is not my favorite image. I just think this corner is, this whole bottom right-hand corner is lacking a little bit of interest. This waterfall is hard to photograph when it's in flood like this. I think the better shots would be more into the waterfall here, where you're around to the left and looking up the waterfall more. At the moment, I feel like it comes and rushes out of the left-hand side far too quickly. So I'd need to be around to the left more to look up at the waterfall and have it more in a vertical orientation down, not directly down the middle of the frame, but more in line with the middle. And so I didn't feel these particularly worked as well as I'd like. I wasn't going to stand in the middle of the waterfall and risk getting thrown off the edge, so to speak. Moving on to the next location, which is Nugget Point in the Caitlin's area. This was the only sort of dull morning that we had where it was trying to drizzle on us. There's two shots here. This, and again, unfortunately, we missed the sunrise on this one. It's not that we were late. It didn't happen. It was a very overcast morning. This would have been a fabulous spot had the sun decided to show itself. And this is now 3 times that I've been to this location at sunrise at this time of year, and it hasn't worked out for us, unfortunately. But the sun would be rising to the left-hand side, way over here on the left, okay? And you get this beautiful cross lighting coming across these this rocky outcrop and the lighthouse, etc. It'd be an absolutely stunning shot should the conditions be right. Okay, now I wanted to show you these 2 pictures because the one on the left here was taken shortly before the one on the right. And there's a slight difference between the two. And the difference that I prefer is that the one on the right here, I've zoomed in a little just to exclude this fencing here, this railing here down in the bottom right-hand corner. I found that a little bit distracting. So you'll see that down the bottom right-hand corner of the frame here compared to this one here, okay? I do like how wide this is, for example. The only thing I'd do differently to this as well is because I'm using a wide angle lens with, let's see. Yep. So it's about 16 mil. And I'm pointing the camera downwards. It's distorting the vertical lines here. The vertical lines are starting to bow outwards, okay? And so we can correct that here in the transform tool here in Lightroom. Let's see if it's going to do it for us. Terrible job. Fail. We use the vertical orientation here to do a bit more like that. If we click constrain crop, you'll now see, can you see here that this post is leaning far less out to the sides than what it was before. It's not quite vertical. And in fact, that's vertical or just off there. And that's corrected it. The problem with doing that correction is you can see how tightly it's cropped in. It's in fact got rid of that fencing there that I didn't like. You can see how tightly it's had to crop in on the image in order to tilt it and have those vertical lines be vertical. I don't mind that. I think we had the space to do it. However, if you did mind that, you would just need to bear in mind that you would need to shoot wider than you want in order to correct that. So if you just see the difference here, that's what we started with, and that's what I've ended up with. Okay, it's fattened the lighthouse as well. Can you see how the lighthouse isn't as tall as it was before? There's various ways that we can fix that as well, just by using the aspect ratio here, and then even going into the crop tool here and extending this out and moving that in a little. We've got the space here. You can even, there's a beta version of Photoshop now is doing automatically what we used to do or still do, which is crop an image like this and then take it into Photoshop, use the magic wand tool to select that space and then use the fill, content aware fill, in order to fill that in. So that doesn't have to be white. This hasn't been worked all that much. How would I work it? I'd add a vignette for sure, just to make it darker on the edges, just to draw your eye into the center of the frame. Okay, quite a bit. Go back to the original image, up the whites a little. I'm just ignoring that top left-hand corner. I'd probably use a brush as well, just with whites, with some feather, and I'd make it much bigger. And I'd actually make this path a bit brighter, because I want that to be the leading, the leading line that takes your eye towards the back of that lighthouse. So get rid of the feather just to be able to create more of a line, and then brush it on terribly. Don't do that. Come up here to the lighthouse, zoom right in. I'm using the command plus and minus in order to zoom in there. I'm going to take that off. I'm going to actually create a new brush with far less white, just to be able to make this adjustment here. That's what we want, you see. We want to keep within the lines, but we also want to make sure that it's not too bright, because otherwise it's just going to look dicky in the photograph. Let's have a look. So when I show you that adjustment here, this is without the vignette, that's with the vignette, and then that's adding those two brushes there along the path, as well as the lighthouse itself. And then the other thing I'd probably do is I just want to probably grunge it up a bit more. Maybe we just click off the brushes here, up the saturation a little, but I'd almost want these two corners to be even more blue, or just a little bit more stormy, not brush. I want to make a linear gradient, so I can draw a linear gradient on this side. Not darken it necessarily, but maybe a bit bluer, a bit more stormy. And then on the other side here, do the same thing here. Darken a little. Yeah, that's nice light with the sun there. Hopefully you can see that. Yeah, I'm happy with that. What I was looking to do with this image is make it more grungy, make it lean into the fact that it wasn't a great morning. I'm not trying to make it bright and sunny and happy and saturated in color necessarily, because it wasn't that type of morning. I'm trying to lean into the fact that it was stormy and moody and bleak. Okay, so darkening the edges, drawing the eye into the center of the frame, running that brush over the path here in order to create that brightness in the path that leads your eye up to the lighthouse being the feature. Because that lighthouse, if too dark or too small, can really get lost. With that wide angle lens, that lighthouse is appearing a fraction of the size in real life. In real life, it's actually a lot bigger than that. But because it's shot at 16 mil, it's pushing the image back, or the lighthouse back, so much further than it really is. That distance from there to there looks like it'd take you 5 minutes to walk, and in fact, it takes you less than a minute. Okay, just to give you some idea. Pretty happy with that. Of course, the other thing that I like to say is that if it's not working in color and you're really having to push these sliders in order to drag any sort of color out of the photograph, what I'd encourage you to do is to try it also in black and white. So let's do that. Let's just go photo, create virtual copy. Here's our virtual copy right here, I hope. Just click off. Yeah, there's the second copy there. And then let's just go black and white. Okay, so there's our black and white version. Now, when I do a black and white conversion, I don't generally use presets. I don't do a lot of black and whites, so I tend not to, spend too much time on them as such. But I always look to make sure that the whites are white. They're not here. They're about one or more stops under. So we'll just go a little bit more with the white. I tend to add contrast because I really love good, strong blacks, and I like nice, bright whites. And then I'll also add clarity to the photograph. And adding clarity increases that micro contrast, but it's also blown out those highlights or those whites. So I need to peak those back a bit as well. Okay. So it's made some pretty heavy blacks, 100% black in these darker areas. I actually don't mind that at all. I find that a lot of my black and whites need 100% black in order to give them that base or that foundation of contrast in order to have it pop in the first place, in order to have it not be the wishy-washy gray that it was when I converted to black and white in the first place. You can sort of see that there. Okay. So I'm quite happy with that as a black and white photograph as well as a color version. And, I prefer either, to be honest. That'll just depend on your personal preference. Some people love black and whites over color. Other people don't like black and white at all, so they'll choose the color version. Make sense? Okay. Let's move on. Okay, so for our next set of images here, this was a fabulous flight over the Alps. Okay, that one has not worked out at all. The focus has missed that completely. Look at that. Unusual. Okay, let's skip that and move right along. I've chosen a series of images here just to show you how I would compose these shots and what I was looking out for, what I was physically seeing and attracted to when I was taking this flight with the participants. So one of the things I've learned in shooting a lot of aerials over the time is that it's probably dangerous to have your eye up to the camera the whole time because you're only seeing that field of view through the viewfinder. It's nice to be able to put the camera down and just be able to look and observe and take your time. There is that sort of psychology when you hop in a plane or an aircraft that's especially costing you megabucks per hour to just shoot away at will and, oh my God, I've got to be quick because this is not going to last long and I'm paying all this money. That's probably a dangerous option because you're just going to shoot a whole lot of rubbish. What you're best to do is be very selective about what you photograph, and I only tend to photograph what draws my eye to it. An hour in a helicopter is a hell of a long time. It's a long time to shoot. You see a lot. So you can be selective. You can afford to raise the bar, hold yourself to a very high standard and say to yourself, I only want to shoot what's really taking my eye so that when I come to edit these photos, I'm not going, oh my God, look, I shot 1,000 photos and only liking 3 of them. You're probably better to shoot 200 photos and liking half of them. Okay, does that make sense? So be selective when you take the photos and really shoot what catches your eye. For example, I love the layering in this one. I particularly like the light that's hitting that part of the mountain there. I'm not a big fan of this light hitting the mountain here in the background, but I could vignette it to darken that a little. I don't want my eye drawn to the right-hand side there, for example. But although there wasn't a lot of snow in this point of the flight, I do like that patterning on the hill that you wouldn't see otherwise. If that was thick snow, you wouldn't see that. Okay, and here you'll see this same sort of landscape, but from a different angle. That was the peak that we were highlighting just in the previous photo there. But again, I love that layering and I love the skimming of the light across this foreground mountain range compared with the background here. I just want to see that there's nothing more done to these other than just a general adjustment. So if you're wanting to see the raw file, that's the raw file. How do I shoot these? I tend to shoot in shutter priority of at least 1,000th of a second. And if I'm shooting bright highlights like this and I'm pointing the camera into a lot of dark, which is in the middle, underexposing by 1 stop. I don't know whether the info will necessarily tell me that. Okay, so auto adjustment's just going to peg back those highlights a little. Again, you'd always want to have, when you're processing these photos, you always want to have this triangle ticked in the histogram here in the develop module, because if the auto adjustment takes it too far or you take it too far, you may not see that and you've blown out the highlights. So we'll just peg that back a little. And add a little blue tone to that. It's a little too warm. See how that's quite warm, which some people might like because it was late afternoon. We took off at 4:30, which was only an hour before sunset. So we're really using the last and the most beautiful light in the day. But sometimes it's nice when you're shooting snow scenes to add a little blue to the image because that adds to the coolness of the image and really enhances that coldness of the snow, I find. Okay, let's have a look at this one here. Bit of layering happening here, which I'm really enjoying. Pretty much an unprocessed image. I love the sort of repetition in these photographs where you're showing mountain range upon mountain range upon mountain range. I love the contrast of this mountain range with all of that bare rock compared to the snow in the background there. And I also don't mind shooting where you've got this dark shadow and just the contrast in landscape photography works extremely well. And this is why I get a little annoyed with this software and auto adjustments that people make, or worse still, they grab the shadow slider and they dial this 100% and they take the highlight slider down to the left-hand side. It becomes a very flat image. You've got too much detail in the shadows. You've really dirtied the highlights, and it just doesn't have enough contrast. Contrast is great in a landscape photograph to give it form, definition, to direct the eye to the brightest parts of the image, to have some sort of, darkness in the image, so to speak. Remember when I was processing those photographs from the boulders here, back here, having the darkness in the image creates this sense of intrigue. If you can even see just a little bit of detail, you're wanting more. You're going, oh, there's a crack there. I wonder how far that goes down. Oh, there's another one there. Look, oh, wow. Interesting. You're not giving everything to the viewer. You've got them, you don't have to, you've got them sort of intrigued and wanting more without actually giving them more. Okay. So if we're to reset this photo, you can see it's quite dull. It's underexposed by a bit. That's fine. Okay. We do an auto adjustment. It wants to drag up these shadows, but you could actually drag those shadows down a fair bit and, be a little bit darker, for example. Looks dark. Up the whites, drag down the exposure. Just because you drag down the exposure doesn't mean that the highlights can't be brighter, but have a look at that. For example, that's how it came out of the camera. And now this is one version or one way I could process this image. Not necessarily the right way, but anyway, layering again, contrast, light, dark, light. You see that? Light, dark, light, that contrast, that separation of this ridge line against the background. Not a great image, so I'll move on. What did I enjoy about this one? I really love this ridge line that comes along here, up over the top and along again. I really love the light hitting that background there. But I do love, there's light hitting this other side of the ridge and it's bouncing into this wall here. And it's creating that beautiful glow there. So we can enhance that even more. I hate the color in that sky that's created. So in fact, what I could do is, we've done an auto adjustment there. If we only want to enhance that color in the foreground, why couldn't we just draw? We could just select, we could do one of two ways. I keep forgetting that we've got these fantastic AI masks now. I've drawn a gradient up from the bottom. We could increase the saturation in the bottom part of the image, or in fact, warm it up using the temperature slider like I've done there, add a bit of magenta. Look at the way that that's enhanced that beautiful color and light in this section here. You could even go one step further, grab a brush, increase the whites, and, brush in something here. I like a bit of feather there. I don't want it to be too defined. And you could drag in some light there. That enhances it even more. And how do I know what to do here? I want to make sure that this is not too obvious. I don't want people to look at this photo and go, oh, you've clearly painted in a whole lot of light on that wall there. I just want them to look at the photograph and go, oh, that's really nice. Okay, so I don't think that's over the top, but if I did, I can just peek that back using this slider here. Okay, let's go back a couple. Actually, I won't. I'm going to keep that because I really like that. I'm just going to create a virtual copy here, reset this virtual copy to the original. There's the original image, and I'll do an auto adjustment again. And just to enhance this foreground, why don't we just use the smart masks here and just say subject, and let's see if it selects the mountain range as being the subject. No, it's sort of selecting that area there. That's fine. Let's just select the sky, which it's easily done, and so it should, because there's clear definition between the mountain range and the sky there. And then we just click invert here. Okay. Click invert, and now it's selected, obviously, the mountain range there. And again, we could increase the brightness there. We could increase the saturation. Remember, I was wanting to do this because I didn't want to increase the global saturation of the image to have that sky just go that really horrible orange. So many ways to skin a cat. Just trying to show you a few options there. Not that we encourage you to skin cats. I really enjoyed this image because this has that beautiful soft light that's now hitting the mountain range, and also to this beautiful line that's coming down here. We're very close to a mountain here, right on the edge, shooting very wide. And there's this beautiful line that comes down this ridge line and then back up here. And oh, look, it ends up over here, which is really nice. Let's have a look at this unprocessed. It's probably not much different. Okay. I really love the contrast here between the mountain range and the sky. And not only the shape and the texture and the definition of this photo, but also to the color. So you've got this deep blue versus yellow. Have a look at this. The color temperature slider has blue at one end and yellow at the other. They're opposite on the color wheel, and any images that you get or any photograph where you get the opposite color in the color wheel in the same photo, like yellow and blue, look, green and magenta, they tend to work really well in together. So this has worked well. We need to up the foreground interest here. I'd crop it a bit. I find those clouds a bit distracting. I really just want it to be about that. In fact, might even crop it even more. Make it a bit more of a pano. And that's very clean. And what I would do is just like we did before, select the sky, invert it, and this just needs to have a little bit more definition. Now, not too much, because again, that's just going to look terrible, okay? Everything you do in Lightroom should be subtle, that it's believable, okay? That almost looks like I've dropped a sky in. Totally 100% looks like I've dropped a sky in. I don't like doing that sort of stuff, but again, if I enhance this mountain range too much, it's totally going to look like that. So we don't want to do that, okay? Let's move on from there. I hope that's given you a nice taste of that beautiful flight over the Alps that we did. I've been fortunate to do that a number of times now in New Zealand. I think out of the sort of 10 or so workshops we've run in New Zealand, we've done it 3 times now. It is so weather dependent that it doesn't always happen, but thankfully we're able to get it done. It's very expensive to hire helicopters and do that sort of thing in New Zealand, but you want to do it if you get the opportunity, because it's breathtaking, as you can see. Now we've moved across to the Glen Orchy region, and I just wanted to select it that way. On the left here, you have the original image with a bad horizon versus the one I settled with, which is the one on the right, okay? And what do I like the right-hand one better than the left-hand one? I think the background is more interesting in the right-hand one. Can you see how you've got these lines that lead down from here? These lines that lead down from here and point your eye towards this mountain range in the background. As to these lines running along the jetty here that run through here and then take you to the background as well. So you've got all of these diagonal lines pointing you to the background. In this one, not so much. And then also you've got a fair bit of overlap of these poles here, okay, that I find a bit distracting. The angle isn't as great. I'm almost looking just slightly off center on this left-hand one, whereas the right-hand one, the angle, there's a beautiful diagonal line coming out of the bottom right-hand corner of the left-hand corner of the frame here. There's no foreground interest in here other than the pebbles in the water. So in my mind, that one's not as interesting as this one. I do actually like the rocks in the foreground here. They're, again, foreground interest. If I had my time again, I'd probably point the camera down a fraction more just to give these rocks a bit more space, and you don't need that much sky. Okay. Now, this one's an interesting one. I talked about this on a podcast recently, and I asked for people's opinion whether or not this was too messy and whether the vertical worked better than the horizontal and whether the color worked better than the black and white. So there's quite a few things we're just going to unpack in this little section here of the video. So I was using a relatively new camera, and I felt like I could create anything and everything out of this camera just because it's a sexy new camera with a nice wide angle lens. And this was a log that had fallen over and was obstructing our view of the lake in the background and the mountain range. And as I approached to sort of get over the top of it to shoot beyond it and not have it be in the way, I actually noticed that it had this really nice, coloration to it, but also movement, so to speak, and beautiful flow, as you can see here. But the problem was all of these twigs here, okay, that can be quite distracting. And in an ideal world, you would probably come to perhaps bash a few off or remove them. Anyway, I thought I'd give it a go anyway, because like I said before, what I was trying to do with my own personal shooting on this workshop is instruct others in how to use the gear, but also how to see perhaps differently. So I'm pushing myself in order to see differently as well, rather than just going for the stock standard stuff. So this is getting in close, shooting wide, pointing the camera downwards, and trying both that vertical and horizontal orientation. I think the vertical is quite, the horizontal here is quite busy. There's a lot going on. There's a lot for the eye to explore, and it really gets a bit lost. Simplifying it by using it vertically and having our eye go along this trunk and then sort of come through the middle here and hopefully get beyond those messy twigs at the top makes this perhaps work. I did enjoy getting very close with a wide angle lens to this image to create that distortion at the bottom of the frame and have that, bark appear a lot closer or a lot larger than it was, but feel like you could almost reach out and touch it. So I'm not sure if these were successful. I'll leave that up to you. They are quite messy, but I think I enjoyed the process and the fact that I was shooting something that I probably wouldn't normally do. And whether that works or not, who knows? Okay. Moving on to the Mount Cook region, and this is a shot from a suspension bridge quite high up. You're probably 10 meters up off this lake, which is Mueller Lake, leading off into Mount Sefton, that you can normally see if it was clear up in the clouds here. Now, this didn't always appear this way. We'd had a great morning the morning before, whereby it had snowed. Okay, which just had, I've never seen that before. So it had beautiful dusting of snow on these rocks, which looked fabulous. But as you can see, quite a dull morning, okay, and grossly underexposed for the fact that I didn't want to shoot any lower than about a 30th of a second because we're standing on a bridge, it's moving, so we need to keep the shutter speed high. Auto adjustment there just to lift it up a little, that's great. But really, if the brightest part of the image is a sky, our eye is drawn to the sky and nothing else. And really, we want it to be down in here. So what we could probably do is we can make a sky adjustment. Let's see if it'll select the sky. Yes, it's done that. We might darken a little, just make it a bit moody. Let's deal with that. Let's go down here to the effects slider and let's make a little bit of a vignette on that just to darken the edges. But overall, the picture is quite dark. Let's lift that up a little with the white slider, but not blow out the highlights. Again, we've got this triangle ticked in the top right-hand corner, so let's just pick that back a bit. And then what I'm going to do, which I say I never do, is do another brush here just to lift the detail here. But I tell you what, this is gonna act twofold. Oh yeah. Okay, let's do that again. Let's just undo that. I'm going to brush this. I have to add the brush again. I'm going to brush this in very selectively just to lift this bottom, because this bottom is too dark. We need that to be brighter than this. That's great. And then I'm going to add another brush. And the brush I want to add here, it's got lots of flow, but saturation. So I'm really going to pump up the saturation here, and not as much of this, but I just want to see where my brush is actually going. Okay. But what I want to do is just enhance the color just in the water here, which I can do a couple of different ways, but this way I think is going to be the most effective way. Okay. Drawing in that mask, not overly defined because a lot of that color is just in the river. So it doesn't really matter if I go over the edge because there's not a lot of color in those rocks. Does that make sense? So I've bumped up the saturation here, and I don't want to take it that far. That's way too much, but you can just see here the difference between before and after with that saturation. It's actually not enough. I want to go a bit more. That's it. That's where I want it to be. Okay. And it's a little bit artificial, and that's what I want, because I want it to be about the river, and I want people to be attracted to that based on the color and the brightness of it. As we did before, we came into here with this brush. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. Double click on those and you could call this one river bottom, like you used to be able to do in, you can still do in Photoshop. You can label all of the layers. But as you can see here, I was just wanting to up exposure here as well, you see? Just up the exposure a little there to brighten the image. So what I've done now is created a few local adjustments to then have it be about the river itself. When we did the auto adjustment, remember that made the sky too bright, and all of a sudden our eye is drawn to the top of the frame where there's not a lot of detail versus down in here, which is where there's yummy detail, rocks covered with the light dusting of snow, beautiful color in the water, which really isn't shown off well here at all by the photograph. So we've made a series of adjustments in order to direct the eye to where we want it to be. Now, the eye can be directed in a number of different ways. It can be the composition of the image, where diagonal lines occur. It can be brightness in the image, which is often the case where you want the subject to be the brightest part of the image. So that's what you look at, or that's what you keep coming back to. It can also be color, just like we've done here. We're going to look more at this river because it's more of an intense blue color compared to the rest of the image, which is pretty dull. Okay. So I've just manipulated the image in a few different ways there in order to create impact and create that visual interest that I want. Okay. Okay, on to the next set of images. This was just to look out over the glacial area there, just interested in these water droplets that were hanging off these this vegetation here. And this is just a couple of different options. I first started with this one, which I don't think is very interesting because those water droplets are just too small in the frame. And then went for a different angle, still nice enough, but again, not really, having the impact that we want. Really just needed to be closer to this one. So we can obviously enhance that by cropping in a fair bit tighter on this image in order to get something perhaps more like that, which is far more interesting. You see, it was just diluted when it wasn't cropped in tight. I eventually went for something more like this. There's more separation between the vegetation. There's far more water droplets to look at. So it's telling more of that story of why in the hell are you taking this photo? And I also love the fact that you've got these diagonal lines running through the frame as well. I'm not a huge fan of this brown vegetation that I just noticed in the photograph here. And in fact, it's been cropped in already. So we could crop this in even more like this, you see. And we could go for something more like that, or you could crop it square if you wanted. But I do like the shallow depth of field here. So not everything is necessarily in focus, but there's certainly some parts of this image that are pin sharp. And because there's another part. So there's at least 2, if not 3 or more of those blades of grass that are sharp. And you can see the beautiful detail in that. As you can see here, what I've done in terms of processing the image is that there's an auto adjustment there, but also to texture and clarity, just to be able to enhance the beautiful texture of those blades of grass, and the clarity is making those water droplets pop. Okay. Here was just a lovely scene looking through the valley. Okay, this is, I think, in fact, from our hotel room, so a very nice view. Mount Cook is up in the clouds here, which showed itself later in the day, which was lovely. But this is your standard 3x2 crop, okay? But why not create something else, by creating, a crop of an image of just that cloud off to the right. But then there was an opportunity here to create a panorama. Okay, so my process here was to sort of go, okay, well, there's your stock standard shot looking through the middle of the valley, but why not stitch a few frames together and get something a bit wider so you've got something of more interest there. That has been unprocessed, okay? So let's add some grunge to that, maybe a little bit of dehaze, for example, not too much. Let's darken this top left-hand corner. It made it a bit dirty, and we've got some dust spots there, so we'll take those out. I discovered afterwards, after the workshop, that in fact my sensor was very dirty. If you're going to go away on a big shoot, or if you're going to go away on a workshop, it wouldn't hurt to either clean the sensor yourself if you're confident doing so, or to get it professionally cleaned, just so you're not having to remove dust spots from your prized photos on any particular workshop all the time. It's disappointing to go to all the effort and time, etc., to take these lovely photos, and then you come to process them and just realize that your sensor is full of crud. It's not much fun at all to sit there in your post-production hours having to clone out dust bunnies. If that turns you on, great, but I can think of better things to do. This is using again the wide angle lens. I'm shooting a lot of vertical because I like getting in very close and replicating that Dombrovskis style of photography, whereby you're getting in close to your foregrounds, really enhancing the beautiful texture, the features of them, and having that lead your eye into the background. And that's Mount Cook in the background there. I'm not saying that's the best example of it, by the way. It's just I noticed that these grasses here had a lot of frost on them from the night before. So I was just looking to enhance that. This is, again, is that example of like, okay, here's the standard 3x2, but then there's the panoramic. It's not difficult to create these panoramas. They don't always work. I'm not saying that this is the best panorama I've ever shot either, but I think this is far more interesting and illustrative of what we saw, because at the end of the day, that one is just simply a 3x2 crop. Okay. But what our eye really saw was all of this. Okay. So it's not difficult just to take a few frames to the left and a few frames to the right and get that view and stitch them together. Okay. And in fact, going along that side of things, this was just taken with the iPhone as we were coming up the path here. It's not, I wouldn't exclude necessarily including artificial elements in the frame as well. I am a more wilderness style of landscape photographer. I love the environment without necessarily human impact. But I find this pathway leads your eye down the frame here and to this bridge section here. Just like this is interesting as well. Again, taken with the iPhone, but just these beautiful converging leading lines. And in fact, if I'd known that it'd come out as well as it had, I probably should have shot that with the real camera as opposed to the other one, the iPhone. This is a place called Thunder Creek Falls. This is a very stock standard shot that I've got a few times. In fact, the first time I visited here, this was like my favorite shot. But this is just simply straight down the guts. As you come from the car park, you get led down a path, and this is the photograph that you can get, or that anyone can get. As I said before, what I was looking to do was challenge myself and the participants to get something different to what you would normally get, or shoot this picture, but then go, right, what more can I get? What's next? What's next? And then just by coming down the path a little, getting along the creek line there and getting underneath the shade of the trees gave you this perspective. So you've got that, those overhanging leaves creating a frame. Okay. And coming around here to the side, I thought this was really interesting to have this branch of the tree just bending down towards the river, and then balancing that with the waterfall on the other side. So you've got the twig on one side, the tree branch on one side, balanced with the waterfall on the other. This sky is a little bit distracting. So I was purposely trying to crop that out, but I haven't processed this fully. So you could easily just crop that down. Okay. It's quite blue in that water there. We could take that out a little if we wanted. We could add a little bit more warmth to the image. That could work quite nicely. And in fact, I'd probably just add a little bit of a linear gradient to this bottom because it's a bit dark. So we could just up the exposure a bit more on that one just to make it a bit brighter. Okay. And in fact, I'm finding the top of that waterfall to be a little bit dark as well. So let's add a brush here. Very small brush with very little feather. We'll just up the exposure slightly and just draw that in to the top. Just balance it. Just balance it with that bottom part. We don't want it to be too bright. And that's nice. I'm happy with that. So that's the differences that we've made there. Okay. And then a horizontal version of that vertical picture as well. Because if you can, why not? Because you might decide that you like one over the other, or you might decide you like both, and then you've got two photos rather than one. Okay. Ship Creek. Yes, it's Ship Creek on the west coast. The west coast of New Zealand can be the best place in the world when the weather is good, and it can be the worst place in the world when the weather's bad. And worst place in the world in a sense that it's spectacular, but you might not see a lot. It might rain continuously for 24 hours or more, misty, foggy, blowing a gale, etc., etc. We just lucked it out brilliantly, or got the best luck ever, in a sense that we had this beautiful fine weather with very little wind. It was just a classic winter's day where it was just stunning, cold, but no wind and spectacular in terms of the light. And so I was teaching a little workshop here whereby I was wanting to show them how to compose this type of image. Now, this is not my favorite image. In fact, this is my least favorite image, but I wanted to show you this because I want to show you what, and I don't do enough of this, is taking the bad shot or the obvious shot, which isn't necessarily the best one, and then going, right, let's be more creative. Let's get the best from this scene. This here is fine enough. We're standing in amongst the dunes. This is a bit distracting. So too are the tire marks. I hate those. By getting down low, I'm in the same spot. I'm in the same spot. This here and this one here, these two brushes in the bottom right-hand corner are these two right here. Now, I hope that you prefer this one over this one. Okay, let's put them side by side. And again, employing that sort of Dombrovskis style of photography, shooting vertically, getting in very close to your subject, it taking up the foreground, taking up at least half, if not 2/3 of the frame, very little sky. Feel like you could reach out and touch that branch or that bush in front of you, that grass in front of you, is what I was looking to aim or achieve from that photograph there. Enhancing the color a little bit, warming it up, but you really need to be close in order to achieve this, you know, with a wide angle lens. Being a meter away is not going to work. Being a foot away, having these grass fronds touching you or touching the camera is where you really need to be in order to have it create impact, but also to you feeling like you could reach out and touch that. So I hope that's created the desired effect there with what I've done there. The next tricky spot that we went to is this beach nearby on the west coast. Beautiful black sand, a few footprints, again some wheel marks here on the beach, not great, but all of these stunning rocks and beach wash. So let me show you. Covered, this was the tide rack at the back of the beach from all of the trees, branches, etc., that have been washed down these glacial rivers in floods. They've gone out to the ocean, and then the tide has pushed them back in. And you can see here just how much of this there was on the beach. So you can imagine that if you were here by yourself, you may well get to the beach and go, oh, this looks shit, or Jesus, where do I start? Where is a composition here? You know, we've got this huge tide rack here, which is very messy. We've got these tire marks on the beach, and then we've got all of these seemingly quite ugly branches / sticks on the beach. It's a matter of just being able to dumb it down to really get to back to the basics of composition, of light, of landscape photography, and say, I'm here with a wide angle lens. What do I need to do? I need a good foreground, I need a good middle ground, and I need a good background. And I really need to simplify this as much as possible so that it's not messy, okay? This is just a stock standard shot to start with, okay? And then we got into the guts of it, which is, okay, how do we simplify this? Can you see the difference between this one and this one? There's a lot less in this photograph compared to that one, okay? And so by simplifying this a little, we've got a more interesting background. We've got a horizon that's not straight. Good on you, Tom. Okay, let's do this where we can just level this off a bit better. That's the problem with shooting with a wide angle lens, either vertically or horizontally, is getting the horizon straight. You can obviously have the display set so that it shows you the spirit level. That's very good. Some people can naturally get it pretty much dead straight. I like to think that I can do that. Other people, no matter how hard they try, or they just don't notice it, it's way off. That's fine. You can obviously correct it afterwards, but obviously you crop in on the image when that occurs as well. So we've just chosen this log in the foreground. It's not a hugely aesthetically pleasing log, I should say. It's not too ugly, but it's not too interesting either. But at least it's out on its own, doing its own thing. Okay. This I find a bit more interesting. So you can actually see where this is taken. This log here is the one that you're going to see over here. Okay, so just walking along the beach, being careful where we stand, not to get our footsteps in the shot, but then kneeling down. In fact, I'm kneeling down and I'm maybe a foot or so away from this rock here. This rock is not very big. Okay, it's probably only about that big. But you can see how much of the foreground is taken up with this wide angle lens, pointing the camera right down. We've got our foreground here, we've got our middle ground, and we've got our background. Another version of that same thing hasn't been adjusted. Let's do a quick auto adjustment to this. Looks like that's what it is. Way too much saturation in the sky there for my liking. But we can take that out. We just go to HSL. We click on this little button here, and then we click and drag that down, and we can rip all the color out of the sky, for example, just by doing that. And that's created more of that sort of desaturated, grungy look that I love, and it deserves for a location like this. Now, these two shots here I want to show you is the first one here on the left is taken standing up, pointing the camera down, but taken standing up. If I crouch down, can you see the difference? Here on the left, I've cut off the stones here, and it's really a bit messy. Whereas when I crouch down, I've given these stones more space to breathe. So there's space to breathe down the bottom. The downside is that I've flattened out the image and I've got less of the mid ground, okay? Which is not necessarily a bad thing because it's included a lot of the cloud as well, which is probably more interesting, okay? So probably not the greatest image, but just to illustrate the fact if you're standing up, pointing the camera down versus crouching down. Okay, what have we got here? Again, walking along the beach, just something perhaps a little more interesting, vertical versus horizontal. This has got far too much saturation in the sky again, so we can rip that out just using this little button. Catch up. Okay. And then it just needs a lift in that foreground there. So let's just use a linear gradient just over most of that foreground and just use the exposure slider just to lift up that detail in the midtones. And we can even enhance that foreground just by using the saturation slider here in the gradient itself, rather than saturating the whole image again, which is going to put more blue back into the sky, which I've just taken out. So I actually really like that process of that image. Perhaps not too bright in that foreground. So we could go a little bit of sort of shadow detail and dumb down the highlights a little. But I don't mind that either. I was attracted to that log because of the shape, the beautiful patterning in it, and also the color as well. Okay, being very selective about what we photograph there. Okay, showed you those tide racks. I'm going to skip a few and then just go on to, again, this was a bit of macro we did back at this location. We're walking through this, this is at Arthur's Pass, walking through this beautiful mountainous region. And once we'd photographed this lovely shot here, we started looking down and seeing all of this stunning macro covered in frost that we totally ignored up until then. And I just wanted to show you sort of my thought process. I was attracted to this particular plant because of the frosted edges, and then sort of tried a few different angles. And in the end, I'm looking for this contrast of angles here. And I settled for this. Okay, so I really enjoyed the contrast between this one going vertically versus this horizontally. Zoomed in a bit tighter, really dropped the focus away, just so that the focus was just on this one frond here, which I found the most interesting because of its vertical orientation and because of the color. And then darken the edges to the image with the processing that I've done. I'm sure I've done a vignette there. Yeah, you see the post-crop vignette. It's really just darkened that image nicely, pumped in a little bit of saturation and a little bit of dehaze just to increase the contrast and increase the clarity in that photograph. And so I've gone from that being the original version to this being a process version. Okay. And the last two sets of images here, this was a beautiful fog, again, hanging over Arthur's Pass as we left that particular morning. Now, this is just showing you the difference in just standing in a different spot. Okay, so this is what we initially saw on the left, but then when we explored a little bit more to the right, the fog started to disappear, which isn't such a bad thing because it makes that background a bit clearer. But have a look at the foreground here. What I enjoy more about this one on the right compared to this one on the left is just this shall we say, pebble bank, this sandbank in the middle of the river here. You can actually see the whole of it rather than here, it's cut away. And so with that, you've got that sort of nice leading line that takes your eye up this from right to left and then takes you into the back of the image here. Okay, so I thought that worked out quite well, just to stand in a slightly different spot as you can see here. Okay. Don't get stuck on just taking the same picture. Okay. Don't just hop out of, this was just literally by the side of the road, hop out of the car, take the shot from standing on top of this quite very tall cliff with this beautiful perspective. I wasn't content with just the one shot. I was like, what would it look like if we kind of explored a little left, a little right? I think I want to get right more so that I'm looking more up the valley, have less of this grass in the foreground here on the left. And that just presented itself with that bank being a little bit cleaner. Okay, so lastly, we're at a place called Castle Hill, which is in between Arthur's Pass and Christchurch towards the end of the workshop here. What we've basically done is a huge circumnavigation of the South Island in 8 days. So we've travelled from Christchurch down the east coast, up through the middle to Mount Cook, and then from Mount Cook down through Wanaka, and then back up the west coast, all the way up the west coast, through turning right, through Arthur's Pass and back to Christchurch. So quite a busy workshop, but it's a taste of the South, this one, where we're just giving everybody a highlights package of all of the different and fantastic locations, pretty much all of them on the South Island. There's obviously others. And so this is Castle Hill, which I hadn't photographed before. Basically what it is a series of boulders that had probably been used for Lord of the Rings or one of those movies, because it is a spectacular spot. Now, this was shot sort of early afternoon, light quite harsh, but perfect for black and white photography, because let me just see if I can show you the color version. The color version's got, enough color in it, but this is sort of dead grass, from the coldness of the winter. And really, I wanted the participants to shoot in black and white. We actually converted our images on the back of the camera to black and white using that monochrome feature, to then just concentrate solely on contrast of light from highlight to shadow. As you can see here, highlights shadows, highlights darkness, but also to shapes and patterns, things like that. Often we can get bamboozled with color, but then not pay a lot of attention to composition, lines, shapes, patterns, contrast between highlights and darkness, things like that. And as you can see here, this is a perfect example where we had these beautiful shadows, but we can use those as features in the photographs, and this beautiful line that snakes through the image to lead to the rest of the frame. Okay, that one, I'm not happy with that. That's what I want, more like that. So what I've done there is it felt a bit squashed. And so you can do this one of two ways. You can change the aspect, as you can see here, in Lightroom, or you could take it into Photoshop and stretch it even more if you wanted, or you could tilt it towards you like this, and that would enhance that image even more like that. But obviously to do that, you're going to be cropping it a little. We could do this, we could do this, we could do something like that. So that was the original. You see, that's the original image, but I just knew once I converted this to black and white and increased the contrast, that boring foreground is not going to be so boring anymore, because it's just a black shadow. But then, as I said to you, I like shadows. I like a bit of intrigue. And then it's all about this beautiful shadow in the foreground. And in fact, we could, again, enhance that even more, like I've shown you already in this video, just by brushing in a little bit of light there. Okay. And let's see how well that mask has gone. Not too bad, but we're only increasing the brightness in the whites, so it's not going to make a huge difference if we've gone over into the shadow areas anyway. This was just an example of two different images. One where I'm shooting here, a bit of a shadow here that I can crop out of myself. But again, I like that contrast between the highlight, the shadow, and the highlight, but also that beautiful curve in the image. But then also too, one of the participants showed me their shot, and they had only included the top half, which I enjoyed as well, because it's not so perhaps messy with this foreground, but also too, you've got that nice cloud just balancing out the image here on the top right-hand corner. And finally, probably one of my favorite images from this workshop, believe it or not, as we're walking along, light just comes through like a shard through the gap here in the rocks. But they've done some replantings of obviously trees in the area with these little plastic shades around them, which I thought, they'll look terrible. That's okay. What I'll do is I'll just darken the whole foreground. I'll make all of that black to hide all of those. And then it'll just be about the sun shining through these two rocks and this shard through the middle. But then when I came to process it, I actually liked the repetition of these plant, what do you call it, plant protectors in the foreground. And so I chose to include them. So this is interesting. This is the original image. Again, looks like rubbish, absolute rubbish. Look, you've got this path here. It's busy. It should be about the light, and it's not. But then once you convert it to black and white, and we really darkened the blacks, let me just click a reset on this. Actually, that was the original image. Import. That's the original photo. Reset. That's the original photo. Get it right, Tom. That's the original photograph. Okay, an auto adjustment just pumps far too much detail into the shadows. So we're going to rip those out. Okay, make some nice blacks, convert the black and white, but then increase the whites. Okay, not totally. And in fact, I don't want it to be too bright in the sun or too bright in the sky. So in fact, I could do this. And as I've done before, do a linear gradient up from the bottom and just add whites to the bottom. Yeah, it's done a bit, but not a heap. Maybe a little bit of exposure as well. Or maybe, so I'm happy with everything so far. I'm happy with the brightness of the sun. I'm happy with the darkness in the shadows. I'm happy even with the amount of light that's produced from these guards. I just think this shard is getting lost. So maybe we add a brush here, increase the whites a little, just brush over this shard a fraction, just to lift it up a little. Now, you'll probably look at that and go, oh, have you done anything? Not really. It's done enough. Again, you don't want to do too much, otherwise it's going to look over-processed in my mind, okay? So there you go. That is it. That is everything from our 1927, no, our 2023 South Island, New Zealand workshop. If you would like to perhaps come on a workshop with me, I hope you've enjoyed that and learned something. Just jump onto my website, which is tomputtworkshops.com. Scroll down on the homepage here. You'll get to see all of the workshops that we have coming up. Many are fully booked at the moment, simply because we have so many repeat customers, which is great. They tend to like me and my bad jokes. But hopefully you'll see that they learn a lot by coming on the workshop. We get to the great places at the right time. We get plenty of time to photograph at them, but there's plenty of that in-field tuition, just like I've shown you in this video, in order to help you while you're taking the photographs and the thought process behind the images that I take, and teaching that to you as well. So there's plenty of workshops coming up. We don't have one for New Zealand just scheduled at this stage, but I'll certainly add that in. And if you'd like to come, you'll be able to just click on learn more or request more information, and you'll be able to get details about that as they come to hand. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Everyone who came on the workshop this year, thanks for coming, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers. Bye.